Welcome back. We've just created two functions for highlighting and unhighlighting our inventory slot. Now we need to decide when we should call these. So we're going to go over to trace for items. So let's take a look at trace for items. Here we are in trace for items in shootercharacter.cpp. And here is where we're going to decide whether or not we should highlight an inventory slot. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check to make sure trace hit item is valid. So I'm going to say if trace hit item, that way we know we're highlighting an item. Now, if highlighted slot is equal to -1, then we know that we are not currently highlighting a slot. So if we're looking at a trace hit item and we're not currently highlighting a slot, we're going to want to highlight a slot. So we can call highlight inventory slot right here. And let's give this a comment and say not currently highlighting a slot, highlight one. Now, if we're tracing and we're hitting something like ammo, which we don't actually put into an inventory slot, then we might not want to highlight an inventory slot. We may want to only highlight the inventory slot for items that will go into the inventory, like weapons. So far, weapons are the only thing that we can stick into the inventory slot. So we can actually cast our trace hit item to a weapon. And that way, we can only highlight the inventory slot if the item casts to a weapon. So let's say auto trace hit weapon equals cast to a weapon, and we're casting trace hit item. So then we can simply check trace hit weapon instead of trace hit item. So this is really only going to broadcast our delegate and play that icon animation if we're tracing over a weapon. So if in the future we create items that we can stick into our inventory that are not weapons, we may need to come back and change this. And since we're not changing trace hit weapon, I'm going to make this a const auto. That way it's clear that we don't intend on changing the trace hit weapon. Now, if trace hit weapon is null, in other words, we haven't hit a weapon with our line trace, we should not be highlighting an item, and we should call unhighlight inventory slot. So here we can create an else case. And in the else case, we're first going to check to make sure that there is indeed a slot being highlighted. So we're going to say, is a slot being highlighted? And we can tell a slot is being highlighted by checking highlighted slot and seeing if it's not equal to -1. If it's not equal to -1, then a slot is being highlighted. So we can say unhighlight the slot. And we can call unhighlight inventory slot. And that will broadcast the delegate with false passed in so that we can stop animating that icon animation. Now, if we're highlighting an item and we're playing that icon animation, what happens when we pick that item up? Well, it's going to start interping, and when it finishes interping, we're going to need to unhighlight because then that slot is going to contain that item we just picked up. So we need to call unhighlight inventory slot in our items finish interping function, which means unhighlight inventory slot should be public. So let's go to shootercharacter.h and let's take unhighlight inventory slot and let's stick that in our public section. And now we can go to item.cpp in finish interping and we can call unhighlight inventory slot here. Now we're checking to make sure character is valid here, so we can stick this right here in the if character check and say character unhighlight inventory slot. Now the last place we need to call unhighlight inventory slot is in item.cpp when we stop overlapping with our sphere. Because if we are looking at the weapon and we're tracing it and we leave the overlap sphere, that is also a spot where we should stop highlighting that inventory slot because we can no longer pick up that weapon. We're too far away. So right here, when we check for shooter character, we can also call shooter character unhighlight inventory slot. Okay, so now we have set this all up in C++. In the next video, we're going to set this up on the widget blueprint so that we can listen for this delegate once we've called it from the C++ side. So we'll see you in the next video.